All right, so thank you, everyone. I am Louis Washington, and I'm calling this community development meeting into order. So we'll start with a roll call. Looks like Councilmember Watton is here, Councilmember Washington, Director Chambliss, Director Artecha. Am I missing anyone else? So I did talk to Joe. He is actually going to, he's indisposed. He's actually has a family event he's attending to. So if there are no objections, we'll go ahead and excuse him with an excused absence.
So move.
All right. Sounds good. We'll move right into the agenda approval. So are there any questions regarding the agenda?
No objection.
Objection. Okay. All right. So we'll see the agenda is approved. Public comment. Any comments from the public online? I don't see anyone here. Anything online?
No.
Anyone online? Okay. So if there's no public comment going once, going twice, we'll move right into the approval of the minutes.
Chair, I move the adoption of the minutes as presented.
Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and approve the minutes. And with that, we'll move into our first item of business, the agenda bill. Agenda Bill 24-040, Traffic Impact Fee Program Development. And at this time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Director Artecha.
Got moved.
Making, we wanted to ensure you get your steps in.
It's thrown the timing off of all the directors.
Chuckle. Good evening, council members. This agenda bill is to introduce or to reintroduce the discussion that we have been having from last year about a traffic impact fee program. A traffic impact fee program is to capture a fair and proportionate share of the costs of new transportation facilities needed to serve new growth and development within the city of Snoqualmie. We have a presentation regarding this tonight from our transportation planner at Farrah and Pierce. He's been working with the city for many, many years. He was here in December of last year, and he is back to help answer some questions and to make sure that you, as new council members on this committee, have the same base level information. So without further ado, Chris, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
All righty. Okay, so I'm going to, as Director Artecha said, give a little bit of a background on transportation impact fees, and then we'll take questions and answers. Let me do this. I just want to confirm because I can't see what you can see. Can you see a PowerPoint?
Sure
Yes, we can see.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's kind of jump right in here. So this is a discussion of these impact fees, which are a new revenue source to the city of Snoqualmie, that can be used to help pay for infrastructure, as was just noted. So just a quick outline. This is not a very long presentation, so we should be able to get through it fairly quickly and have plenty of time for questions and answers after the end. So I wanted to provide a little bit of background about how growth has helped to build infrastructure in the history, historically in Snoqualmie, and why we are talking about this new financing mechanism today. Introduce what transportation impact fees are. They are part of the state's Growth Management Act. I'll get into some of the rules about those because they have some specifications that we have to follow to set them up, which is why I'm here sort of as a technical expert who does this for many communities. Speak a little bit around neighboring jurisdictions and what their impact fees are, talk about potential revenues from some example projects here in Snoqualmie, and then open things up for discussion. So just a little bit of a background for the city of Snoqualmie is clearly we wouldn't be here today if the city already had transportation impact fees, which are quite common, as you'll see in a moment, in jurisdictions throughout Washington state, but particularly in Western Washington. Most jurisdictions have transportation impact fees. Having worked with the city for about 15 years now, I've seen a number of the areas of growth in Snoqualmie come about. And a good reason for why there haven't been impact fees previously is that most of the growth historically in the city has been through large planned unit developments. So things like Snoqualmie Ridge 1 and 2. And of course, there's another master plan development with the mill site that's out there in the future as well. And particularly for Snoqualmie Ridge 1 and 2, as part of the development evolution for those projects, the city worked with Quadrant Homes at the time to conduct an environmental impact statement. So that's part of the state's Environmental Policy Act, to identify what the implications to transportation are for building out the development in the ridge. And as part of that, mitigation was identified, and ultimately what's known as a development agreement was crafted that stipulated what exactly the development of Snoqualmie Ridge would entail in terms of building infrastructure in the city, which to sort of cut to the chase included the development of what we would call a system roadway, Snoqualmie Parkway, which is not something that serves just Snoqualmie Ridge, but also connects it to the rest of the community and provides connectivity at a larger scale. That's a type of improvement that was built through a development agreement. So the developers were on the hook to build that particular piece of infrastructure. This can work well for large scale developments, but most communities around the state don't have this type of growth. In fact, most development these days is more of an infill nature or smaller scale annexations, short plats and redevelopment. And development agreements can be really complex to set up and administer at that scale. And thus the Growth Management Act allows for impact fees. So what are these things? So as noted, they are when the Growth Management Act was established, which provided a requirement for cities to ensure that transportation infrastructure was developed at a pace with new growth. There was a funding mechanism that was included along with those requirements to build out infrastructure by the community. And those are transportation impact fees. So these go back the whole sort of span of the Growth Management Act. And they are a one-time assessment. So you can only charge them once on the initial development of a property. Although I'll give a little asterisk, is that if there's a change of use that was not initially as part of the permitted use of the land use, you can charge the difference if that new use is generating more use of the transportation system. And I can answer questions on that. But think of them predominantly as a one-time assessment that is paid for at the time of building permit or certificate of occupancy. You have a few options. This one-time assessment has to be paid for new transportation capacity. And what that means, there's a whole bunch of stipulations in the law, but think of it as that you cannot use impact fees to pay for maintenance, can't use them to pay for safety, can't use that, they cannot be used to pay for enforcement of any rules. So they really have to build new capacity for growth. That's why they're part of the Growth Management Act. New legislation has explicitly clarified that transportation impact fees can be used for multimodal projects. So in other words, for anything that can allow people to move. So roads, sidewalks, bike trails, anything that provides for the movement of people to connect one place or the other. For example, you couldn't build a loop trail inside of a park that doesn't really connect to anything, but you can build a bike trail adjacent to a park that provides connectivity for people who want to go to that park from other parts of the community, or would use that to pass through the park to get to different places. And one of the stipulations in the rules is that transportation impact fees cannot be the sole means to fund a transportation improvement program. In other words, you can't say, well, we have these fees and they will pay for everything on our project list. The law explicitly says they have to be part of a larger funding strategy. And by the nature of how they're calculated, you need to supplement transportation impact fees with other dollars. And they could be of any sort: grant funding, special transportation funding like transportation benefit districts, or general funding. The choice is not tied once you find a different source of funding. So transportation impact fees, as I noted, they're very common in throughout the entire state, but particularly in Western Washington. Listed an example of some of the neighboring jurisdictions that have impact fees, and they range in size from larger cities off to the west, like Redmond, Bellevue, and Issaquah, to smaller communities, North Bend, Duval, Carnation. All of these communities have transportation impact fees, so they're not new to the development community. In fact, Snoqualmie is relatively unique in not having impact fees. So developers and people who finance land use development projects are very familiar with transportation impact fees, and in fact are often citing them as helping to add some predictability in terms of the cost to develop land, because you pay your impact fee and you have a much lower, if no, mitigation fee, which is often not known at the time that you might be submitting a development proposal. So this is hard to read, but I'll let folks squint at it in a little bit and we can dive into any details. I wanted to highlight, again, some of the neighboring communities and what their impact fee rates are. And the best way to think of this number, so picking the number at the top, North Bend has the highest transportation impact fee in the list. In fact, it's the highest in the state. And it is at about $15,000 per unit. And the units for impact fees are almost universally what are known as PM peak hour trips, but that doesn't mean anything to most people. A better way to look at this is that for each single family home generates about 1 PM peak hour vehicle trip. For each apartment home, it generates somewhere between 0.5 to 0.6 trips. So this is about the fee that it would cost to develop, or a developer would have to pay in transportation impact fees for a single family home, or a little under 2 multifamily apartments or condos or townhouses. So you can see most of the communities around Snoqualmie have relatively high impact fees. The statewide average, this was from 2023, was about $5,100 per PM peak hour trip. Working with a number of cities right now who are updating these fees, they're all going up a fair bit this year, because not like everything else, inflation has really increased the cost to implement transportation projects. So I expect these numbers to be considerably higher come next year, as a lot of communities are updating their transportation elements and therefore needing to figure out how are they going to help to pay for those things. But the point of this slide is that the fees around you are common and relatively high compared to the rest of the state and even Western Washington. So and what does that mean? In terms of revenues, so right now, I think that Snoqualmie has no impact fees. And so just to put this in perspective, so there's a relatively new hotel on Snoqualmie Parkway over by the Safeway there. If we had impact fees that were of the average of what I just showed of those communities nearby on the prior screen, that would have generated roughly $400,000 of revenue for the city to spend on transportation projects. Looking at, I just threw a dart basically at a map of the buildings in the Snoqualmie Business Park, and picked one there. It's a pretty average sized building, 56,000 square feet. That would generate about a little over almost $1.3 million of transportation impact fees. So these fees are not trivial, but they're also, again, not something that particularly dissuades development from occurring in the surrounding communities. And many of the communities, for example, I was just at a city council meeting with Redmond. Redmond's transportation capital budget, the largest share of funding is from transportation impact fees. So it's a pretty important part of their overall way that they finance new infrastructure in the city. And so that's true for many communities around you. So that's really all we had. Just wanted to provide some background, some of the basis for this. The director can close off if she has anything else to add, but that's what I wanted to share to make sure that everyone was on the same page of what we presented back in December. Stop this just so I can see folks.
Chris, can you go back to I think it's maybe 2 slides, just where it shows the numbers and the cities?
Absolutely, yes.
Make sure I understand that. Okay. So I'll just take that top entity there. So North Bend, so $15,210. So am I correct in saying, or when I hear this and saying that, that would be per household?
Yes, so if you were developing a new lot in North Bend, you would have, and I put a single family home on it, that is nominally the transportation impact fee that you would have to pay the city.
Okay. Okay. So roughly for an apartment complex, it'd be roughly half of that.
Per
Correct?
unit, correct, yes.
Okay. Okay.
And there are some, in the law, there are notable exemptions that the city can elect to implement, if you so choose, related to low-income housing. You can exempt basically any amount of that fee that you want. The statute says 80% unless there's some AMI limitations, which there typically are on those units. Average median income limitations. And similarly for childcare facilities, the city may also choose to exempt those uses. You can't exempt any others per state law. But so I thought I would mention that if that's of interest.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Councilmember Watt.
Okay. This one I need to think long and hard about. First of all, is we have roughly, in my estimate, 80% of everything built out that we're going to build out. We have 700 possible homes over the course of 20 years, 160 at the mill site. Some of those are going to be in the affordable housing realm, so not a total 160. I did my calculation. If we just, if presuming that we land on some number, maybe 5,000 on 700 units, and that's not counting the commercial development, that's about 3.5 million. It's a good sum of money, and it's not all the money that we would use. We'd go out and find other money. My consternation is finding that happy medium between what, I don't know, neighboring city North Bend is charging and something that's maybe a little more reasonable. And so anyway, that's my biggest concern is I'm just very, very price sensitive to whatever we decide, if we decide. That's my thought.
So a note on the fees. If you elect to implement an impact fee ordinance, which is sort of the kind of the next sort of step that would need to be taken, there would be a study that would identify, here's the maximum amount that you can legally charge. And that's typically done. And then you as the city council have the discretion to pick any number between that maximum and zero. So some cities have impact fee ordinances that they have suspended for some reason or another, or others will charge only a portion, say a 2/3 of the maximum allowable rate. And that you can adjust that sort of as a legislative body, sort of with whatever regularity you deem appropriate, without trying to make it administratively too difficult to do. So I hear exactly what you're saying. When you do these impact fee ordinances, I'm trying to, I guess, point out that you have discretion as to what, if anything, you want to charge. You're not bound by any hard number per se.
Sure.
Oh, sorry. Director Chambliss.
So back in history, when I was a community development director, when we did these, we did it a different way. We didn't look at what people were charging around us and try to put the dart on the right number.
Mhm.
We went through the process of developing the new projects that we were going to do, determining how much that was going to cost and setting the fee that way. That way we didn't collect too much or too little. We collected the appropriate amount.
Director
Yeah.
Arteche, yes.
Spot on, City Administrator Chambliss. Chris, could you take a minute to talk about the linkage between the city's TIP and the projects listed on there and the estimates for the cost and how this is tied into, the capital facilities planning that we're doing, the transportation element and all of that?
Yeah, so how these fees get set is they are, as was pointed out, they're not arbitrary. They are based on a defined list of projects. That project list has to be consistent with your capital facility element of the comprehensive plan. So effectively, what rolls out of the transportation element that is financially feasible to build over the time span of the the comprehensive plan, that is often then sort of built into the transportation, the TIP. And so that list of projects, whatever that is, and whatever it costs to build that is the starting point for what the fee is developed around. And as I mentioned, we can't have that entire project list be funded by impact fees for both legal and technical reasons. We cannot charge for use of those facilities that's not under the administration of the city. For example, if there's growth in Fall City or whatever, somewhere in King County that's adding traffic to a given facility, we cannot charge those folks an impact fee. And so there's a thing called a rate study that defines, here's what your project list and how much it costs. And here is what the fair share of dividing that up over growth within the city would be on a per unit basis, that per PM peak hour trip basis. And you can say, well, that's really expensive. And you have a couple of choices. You can either trim back the project list that you're committing to build, which has implications that either you're not going to build as much stuff or you have to come up with additional funding from somewhere else. Or you can decide to not charge as much of an impact fee, but that leaves you with a list of projects that has a larger piece that needs to be funded from another revenue source. And the choice is yours, again, either way of how you choose to proceed from that point forward. But the numbers for like North Bend are coming from their long-range transportation plan, and are divvied up amongst the growth that North Bend is expecting to see over the next 20 years. And that's true for that's all the cities, how these numbers came about.
City Administrator Chambliss.
Chris, does Washington allow you to set different rates for different development classes such as industrial and low-income housing and single-family dwellings, as long as you reach the total of the project list?
So the case law around this is governed by some sort of US Supreme Court cases that require a fair proportionality of impact fee burden across different use types. And what that means is that unless explicitly exempted by law, which again, the state law exempts low-income housing and daycare facilities, childcare facilities, you have to charge the same rate per unit for all other land uses. So that you can't favor, project X over project Y is why this comes to pass. That doesn't mean that a 10,000 square foot industrial building pays the same amount as a 10,000 square foot retail building. They pay quite different rates because the retail project generates a lot more use of the transportation system than say a mini storage or light warehousing use. So the rate per use of the system is the same, but there is variation across different land use types about how much they are expected to be using the system, and that's using industry standard data is where those numbers come from.
Sounds like fun.
So it's my understanding, and this is maybe more of a question for Director Arteche. It's my understanding that while we currently here in Snoqualmie, while we currently don't have transportation impact fees, we look at the project we built, the mill site, and we did include, I'll call it transportation mitigation or transportation negotiation in that. So I guess for me, I'd want to see kind of what, and I bet if we dig deep enough, we'll probably find the same thing for the development of the bridge. And I'd want to see kind of what that already looks like. I think this is a great idea. Absolutely, this is a great idea in terms of a baseline. But I'd like to see what we've done previously. Absolutely. Go ahead, Director Arteche.
Two comments. So
Okay.
just trying to hit maybe at the first one, the mill
Okay.
site. So the city did do a development agreement, and it is expected that that project will generate a large amount of traffic. Chris and I both talked about that over the last few months, numerous times. We have good estimates for phase one. We have less good estimates, or maybe no estimates for phase 2 and 3. And all the development agreement at this point says is that the developer should provide the city a transportation impact analysis to help determine what the impacts might be. And then we can start determining, how to address those impacts. Chris and I both talked about the development agreement and the mill site, acknowledging that they were mutually exclusive, that one didn't prevent the other from moving forward, that they could both move forward. Chris, can you talk about that a little bit from a technical perspective, what that means? Because it is a little bit complex.
Yeah, so there are a number of cities that are going to have impact fees and development agreements in place simultaneously. And again, I reviewed the mill site DA as Director Arteche had noted. And there is a commitment to identify future transportation impacts and the exact mitigation at the time more specificity about the development is known. Again, fairly common. So what that means for the developer is that they need to do a traffic study at their cost in the future to identify and prove to the city, here's the degree of impact and the specific mitigation, and a negotiation will have to take place as to what exactly the mill site's share of that mitigation might be. In cities that have an impact fee program, if there's a project on the impact fee list, that, for example, it might be to, you know, widen the intersection at SR 202 and Snoqualmie Parkway, just as an example. I'm not saying that's something for the mill site, but if that was a project on the impact fee list, the mitigation for the mill site would almost certainly be to pay the impact fee, unless the scale of the development was so large that they needed to actually have that widening in place by the time that their units are online. And in that case, they would have to build the project and then get a refund from the impact fee program. The point being that impact fee programs make the subsequent phases of development a lot simpler in many cases, because a lot of times, especially for more remote impacts that would have been identified, the fee is paid in lieu of any new studies and mitigation, because that's what the purpose of the fee program is. However, if there are certain projects that are of a scale that really were not part of the impact fee project list, or very more located around the bridge, or excuse me, the mill site development area, those projects are still under the DA, the development agreement, even though there's an impact fee program in place. And they would have to follow the rules of the development agreement as already written, identify a traffic study, figure out what the impacts and an appropriate mitigation are, and negotiate with the city to finalize that agreement. So they're not mutually exclusive. The impact fee programs can make the administration of the development agreement a lot simpler, especially for larger scale transportation capital projects.
Director
You had
Tetra.
also asked about a question, and Chris, feel free to jump in, but Snoqualmie Ridge 1 and 2, mostly built out.
Mhm.
There's still some potential for development in SR 2, not so much in SR 1.
Mhm.
There's quite a bit of potential for an annexation to occur off Douglas
Yeah.
for an expansion of a business park. And then there's numerous other opportunities for infill. We saw one slip by without a traffic impact fee program on Railroad Avenue. Just a small, just over 2,000 square foot, a new building. But no contribution towards the impacts created for the use of the transportation system.
Okay. Thank you, Director Tetra. Chris, can you just explain, if I hear you correctly, I hear you saying that in essence, we can have both the commitments from the DA and also the transportation impact fee.
That's correct.
Can you just explain how that's possible? I just need to understand that piece.
Yeah, so and you're raising a good question. There's an explicit rule that you can't double dip. Double dipping is not allowed. So you can't charge an impact fee and require a developer who's under a development agreement to also pay a mitigation fee in addition to the impact fee. That is explicitly not allowed, nor would it be fair. So how this works is that, because the way the development agreement is written and what's written for the mill site is very common, it basically says that once there's more details known about the scope of, a part of the phase of the development that's seeking specific approval, they are required to identify the mitigation and their contribution to that mitigation through an independent traffic study. That's what the development agreement says.
Mhm.
If it happens to be that they're impacting a facility that has an impact fee project on it, it's pretty much a done deal that we don't need to do a study. We just pay the impact fee and move along. And so it simplifies what the developer has to do, and the city, because the city's already taken the step to identify a fair share payment for that site, for the scale of the mill site development. So the development agreement is sort of a belt and suspenders that you could use outside of the impact fee program if there are projects that, for whatever reason, were not included in the impact fee program. They would typically be more site serving than city serving. So that's how you can have both of them, is that the impact fee program actually takes a lot of the weight off of the development agreement, because you've already come up with a quantified mitigation program for all development in the city that meets the rough proportionality test of any mitigation program.
Right. That's a lot more clear for me. Thank you. Any questions?
Good. I'm good. Thank you.
City Administrator, any questions? Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris.
Happy to answer the questions.
At this time, Director Artesia, I don't think we have any other questions for our guest speaker. So if there are no other questions, I think that, I guess, well, I'm thinking about this and we're missing one committee member. So go ahead,
Yes,
Director.
Councilmember, Washington, Councilmember Johnson was present
Okay.
at the time that this presentation
Mhm.
was done before. So I feel pretty good that you two were here to hear it and talk about it, and less, less uncomfortable that Councilmember Johnson wasn't here. I think he's pretty familiar with the content, and as I recall, very favorable about continuing to pursue the development of a program.
Absolutely. And you're correct. And I did have a discussion with him as well. At this point, Director, do you want to move forward with it as an agenda item on the council?
Correct, but not for the adoption of a program,
Right.
just to
For discussion?
basically allow the development of a program, or allow the contents of the program to come forward for further evaluation. So we don't have more than just the framework of what this does and how it functions and what others have used it for. We haven't actually put the rubber to the road to see what it could do for Snoqualmie. So the ask would be to simply just make a motion on the 25th, if the council so chose, to agree that this would be something that the staff could go back and initiate the development of a program for further consideration.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Director. So at this point, if there are no further discussions on the subject at hand, we'll move it up to the council for a broader discussion. And kind of go from there.
Hold on. Yeah.
So at this point, for the discussion items, I know that we got a list from Councilmember Wadden. I know Councilmember Johnson is still working on some items. I'm still working on some items, but we'd like to hold that piece of it until our next community development meeting. And at that time, we'll bring in those discussion items. If there are no other discussion items at this point, we would like to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Okay, not hearing anything. We are adjourned at 6:44.